combat effectiveness of the Montagnards became legendary amongst US soldiers.
I served with the 4th Infantry Division in Vietnam in 1968, 1969. The Montagnards were vital to our effort in Vietnam. They were scouts and interpreters and were very loyal to us.
As the Vietnam conflict escalated, the Central Highlands became a war zone. The area would be saturated with B-52 airstrikes, and major confrontations such as the Battle of the Nha Trang Valley and Dak To would be fought here.
There were thousands of Montagnards who lost their lives fighting for the Americans over in Vietnam. Many of them were crossing over into Laos, crossing over into Cambodia, rescuing down pilots and down pilots in enemy-occupied territories. And in fact, the Montagnards came in twice trying to rescue me and just ended up missing me by about 5 minutes. But I was in a cage like this for 1 year over in Cambodia, and I spent 27 months in solitary confinement.
Hello, young man.
Hi!
By early 1973, the United States had pulled all of its combat forces out of Vietnam, leaving behind only advisors and embassy officials.
4 years and 2 months ago, when I first came into this office as president, by far the most difficult problem confronting the nation was the seemingly endless war in Vietnam. 550,000 Americans were in Vietnam. As many as 300 a week were being killed in action. Hundreds were held as prisoners of war in North Vietnam. And tonight, the day we have all worked and prayed for has finally come. For the first time in 12 years, no American military forces are in Vietnam. All of our American POWs are on their way home. The 17 million people of South Vietnam have the right to choose their own government without outside interference. And because of our program of Vietnamization, they have the strength to defend that right.
This program failed 2 years later with the collapse of South Vietnam.
I'll never forget the emptiness I felt and that came over me in April of 1975 when I watched the television to hear that Ban My Thuot had just fallen to the North Vietnamese. And the first thing that came into my mind, and I was in tears, the first thing that came into my mind was what was going to happen to those Montagnards. I knew very well that they already had the odds against them in South Vietnam, against their own allies, supposedly, at the time. And now that the North Vietnamese had swept through Ban My Thuot, one of the first areas to fall during that blitzkrieg by the North Vietnamese, I knew then that these people would be faced with the worst possible consequences for who they were, for who they served with, the strong allegiance that they personally had as a group of people to the United States, that those consequences would turn out to be most likely genocide for them after the war ended as the way it did. And I think that that's what probably has happened over the course of the past decades.
Thousands of Montagnards ended up fleeing the highlands, and these people, men, women, and children, little kids, babes in arms, they were afraid that they were going to all be executed. Well, they were executed just by the thousands as they tried to end up fleeing over. It's just cold-blooded murder by the North Vietnamese.
Ed Sprague witnessed the chaos as thousands of Montagnard survivors fled to the coast and amassed at Nha Trang Beach.
We were on the beach there because I was told that the U.S. Navy boat's going to come in and pick up, all these people.
As the Montagnards awaited the evacuation fleet, Ed Sprague was ordered to return to Saigon.
So when I got to Saigon, they said, Master told me, they called that off. And that's when I lost it, So, on him, and he told me to get out of this country.
And at that time, there was a meeting held in the embassy, American embassy, on what the Montagnards should do. They were promised, in a way, it depends on how deep you want to say the promise was, but it was very well insinuated that the Americans would continue to support the Montagnards.
The Minister of Ethnic Minorities, Mr. Naylouet, feared the genocide of his people and met with the Special Assistant to the Ambassador, George Jacobson.
Naylouet asked that they give some priority to evacuation of certain Montagnards that he was sure they'd be killed immediately by the North Vietnamese or sent to Hanoi to their concentration camps. Also, he asked that they be provided equipment to continue with resistance. Jacobson told him, yeah, we're going to help you out, we're going to do this. But that's not what he meant. And I knew it immediately. You know, this meeting's a disaster. So the meeting broke up, and Naylouet and I walked out together, and he seemed to be very happy.
Ed Sprague had to tell the minister the truth.
So I said, this is not what he meant. He didn't promise you anything. He just brushed you off. And Naylouet looked at me and said, you believe that? I said, yes, I don't, it's not that I believe it, I know it. And of course, he was pretty sad. We went to dinner, and it was mostly goodbyes, and it was very, very sad. When we walked out of the restaurant, he says, let's take a walk. We all walked down, this was in the middle of Saigon. We walked down the street for a couple of blocks. Louet just wanted to walk and said nothing. None of us said anything. There's the minister, 2 or 3 congressmen, I can't remember, the 2 senators. We just walked, and then walked back to Louet's house and said goodbye, and that was it. It was probably one of the saddest days of my life. And Kasoa Rutt, the senator, when the North Vietnamese did take over the provinces, they immediately took him to the middle of the square in Bami Tut and shot him in the head. My good friend. So Louet was right. You know.
The promised help did not arrive. Naylouet and his staff were not evacuated. Now the fate of the Montagnards was sealed.